The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the weathered ranch house, and Katherine Miller's stomach twisted with apprehension as she noticed the complete absence of life around the property. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Boston to Madisonville, Texas, carrying nothing but a carpetbag, her mother's Bible, and a collection of letters from a man named Kenneth Kane, who had promised her a new life as his wife. The June heat of 1876 pressed against her traveling dress like a suffocating blanket, so different from the cool Massachusetts springs she had known all her 22 years. The driver, a grizzled man with sun-weathered skin, helped her down from the coach and deposited her single bag on the dusty ground. "You sure this is the right place, miss?" he asked, squinting at the silent homestead. "Looks mighty quiet for a man expecting his bride." Katherine smoothed her skirts and tried to steady her racing heart. "This is the address Mr. Kane provided. I am certain of it." The driver shrugged, climbed back onto his perch, and with a crack of his whip, the horses pulled away, leaving Katherine standing alone in the Texas wilderness. The ranch house before her was modest but well built, with a covered porch and sturdy wooden walls that spoke of careful construction. A barn stood some distance away, and she could hear the soft lowing of cattle from somewhere beyond her view. But still, no one emerged to greet her. She picked up her bag and walked toward the house, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The front door stood slightly ajar, which sent another wave of unease through her chest. Back in Boston, her sister Emma had warned her that answering a mail-order bride advertisement was reckless, that she knew nothing about this Kenneth Kane, except what he had written in his letters. But Katherine had few options left after her father's death had left the family in debt, and her prospects for marriage in Boston had dwindled to nothing but aging widowers looking for unpaid housekeepers. Kenneth's letters had been different. He wrote of wide, open spaces, of building something meaningful with one's own hands, of wanting a true partner to share his life. His words had been thoughtful and kind, revealing a man of intelligence and substance. She had allowed herself to hope, perhaps foolishly, that she might find not just security but genuine companionship in this marriage of convenience. "Hello," she called out, pushing the door open wider. "Mr. Kane," a groan from inside made her freeze. Then she heard it again, a sound of pain that sent her propriety scattering. Katherine dropped her bag and rushed inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, sparsely furnished but clean. A doorway led to what she assumed was the bedroom, and that was where the sound had come from. "Mr. Kane," she called again, moving toward the doorway. "I am Katherine Miller. Are you hurt?" "Stay back," a man's voice rasped, hoarse and weak. "Fever might be catching." But Katherine had not traveled across half a continent to cower at the threshold. She stepped into the bedroom and found a man lying on a narrow bed, his face flushed with fever and slicked with sweat. Even in his current state, she could see he was younger than she had expected, probably no more than 26 or 27, with dark hair plastered to his forehead, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard growth. His blue eyes, though glassy with illness, held a mixture of surprise and dismay as he looked at her. "You should not have come in," he said, trying to push himself up on his elbows and failing. "I am not fit for company, and certainly not for a bride." Katherine set her jaw and approached the bed, placing her hand on his forehead despite his weak protest. His skin burned against her palm, and she felt a surge of concern that overrode everything else. "How long have you been like this?" "4 days, maybe 5. Lost track." His words came with effort. "Thought I could shake it off. Wrote you a letter to postpone your arrival, but I suppose it did not reach you in time." "Obviously not," Katherine said, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. Her mother had been a practical woman who believed all her daughters should know how to manage a household and tend to the sick. Katherine had spent enough time nursing neighbors and family through various ailments to recognize that Kenneth Kane was seriously ill. "When did you last drink water?" He gestured vaguely toward a pitcher on the small table beside the bed. It was empty. Katherine rolled up her sleeves, her decision made. She might have come here expecting a wedding, but she had found something else entirely. A man in desperate need of help, alone on this isolated ranch with no one to care for him. Whatever else happened, whatever this strange arrangement between them ultimately became, she could not in good conscience abandon someone in such a state. She spent the next hour exploring the house and getting her bearings. The well was out back, and she hauled up bucket after bucket of cool water. She found clean cloths in a chest, located the modest kitchen supplies, and discovered that Kenneth had been prepared for her arrival in other ways. There were provisions he had clearly purchased in town, including flour, sugar, coffee, and even a few tins of fruit, luxuries that spoke of a man trying to make a good impression. By the time she returned to the bedroom with fresh water and clean cloths, Kenneth had drifted into a restless sleep, mumbling incoherently. Katherine set to work with practiced efficiency, bathing his face and arms with cool water, changing the sweat-soaked sheets beneath him with some difficulty, and managing to get him to swallow a few sips of water each time he stirred toward consciousness. As night fell and the Texas heat finally began to ease, Katherine lit a lamp and settled into a chair beside Kenneth's bed. She studied his face in the flickering light, trying to reconcile this fevered stranger with the man whose letters she had read and reread on her journey west. He had written about his ranch with quiet pride, about the herd of cattle he was building, about his hopes for the future. He had been honest about the hardships she would face, about the isolation and the hard work, but he had also written about the beauty of the wide Texas sky and the satisfaction of building something lasting. "I should have warned you better," Kenneth muttered, his eyes opening briefly. "This is not what you signed up for." "Hush," Katherine said gently, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "Save your strength." "You will want to leave," he continued, his words slurring slightly. "Cannot blame you. Take the wagon into town tomorrow. Send a telegram to your family. I will pay for your journey back." "I am not leaving," Katherine said firmly, "and we will not discuss this further until you are well enough to think clearly." Something like relief flickered across his feverish face before he sank back into sleep. The night stretched long and uncertain. Katherine dozed occasionally in her chair, but mostly she stayed alert, monitoring Kenneth's fever and encouraging him to drink whenever possible. Toward dawn, she thought perhaps the fever had broken slightly, but she knew from experience that these things often got worse before they got better. As the first light of morning crept through the window, Katherine heard the sound of horses approaching. She rose stiffly from her chair and went to the front door, opening it to find a man dismounting from his horse. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent his entire life outdoors. "Morning, miss," he said, removing his hat. "Name is Walter Pritchard. I have the ranch adjacent to Kenneth's. Noticed his stock looking poorly tended and thought I would check in." "Is Kenneth around?" "Mr. Pritchard, I am Katherine Miller," she said, grateful for the appearance of a neighbor. "I arrived yesterday from Boston. I am afraid Mr. Kane is quite ill with fever." The older man's expression shifted to concern. "That boy. I told him he was working himself too hard. How bad is it?" "Serious, but I believe he will recover with proper care. I have been tending to him through the night." Walter nodded approvingly. "You are the mail-order bride he mentioned." Brave of you to travel so far, and even braver to stay after finding him in such a state. Many would have turned tail and run." "I am not many," Katherine said simply. A smile tugged at Walter's mouth. "I can see that. Kenneth is fortunate in his choice. Now, what can I do to help?" "I assume the stock needs tending, and you will have your hands full nursing him." Relief flooded through Katherine. "I would be grateful for any assistance. I confess I know little about cattle or ranching. Do not trouble yourself about it. I will see to the animals and spread word to a few other neighbors. We take care of our own out here. You just focus on getting Kenneth back on his feet." True to his word, Walter spent the morning handling the ranch work that Kenneth had been too ill to manage. He also brought Katherine fresh milk and eggs from his own supplies, refusing to hear any talk of payment. Before he left, he promised to send his wife Sarah over the following day with some prepared food and medicine that might help. Katherine returned to Kenneth's bedside to find him awake and more lucid than he had been since her arrival, though still clearly weak and feverish. "I heard voices," he said, his blue eyes following her as she approached with a cup of water. "Was that Walter?" "Yes. He came to check on you and has agreed to help with the stock until you recover." Katherine helped him sit up enough to drink, supporting his shoulders. "You have good neighbors." "The best," Kenneth agreed, then coughed roughly. When he recovered, he looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "You are truly Katherine. I thought perhaps I had dreamed you." "I am quite real, I assure you," she said with a slight smile. "And you were correct. This is not how I imagined our first meeting. But life rarely proceeds according to plan." "That is certainly true." He studied her face with an intensity that made her suddenly conscious of how she must look after a sleepless night. "I am sorry. You traveled so far, and this is the welcome you received." "Stop apologizing," Katherine said, though not unkindly. "You did not choose to fall ill. Now you need to eat something. I am going to make broth, and you are going to drink every drop of it." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Yes, madam." Over the next several days, Katherine fell into a routine of nursing that consumed all her energy. Kenneth's fever worsened before it began to improve, and there were long hours when she worried he might not survive. She sponged him with cool water, forced fluids down his throat, and changed his sweat-soaked bedding multiple times a day. Sarah Pritchard proved to be a godsend, arriving with medicines and broths, offering both practical help and moral support. "You are doing well, dear," Sarah told her on the third day, watching as Katherine efficiently prepared another cool compress. "Kenneth is lucky you know what you are about. Many young women from the city would have been completely lost." "My mother believed in practical education," Katherine replied, wringing out the cloth. "She said a woman should be prepared to face whatever life brings, not just the pleasant parts." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Katherine said quietly. "She died 2 years ago. I miss her wisdom more than I can say." The older woman reached over and squeezed Katherine's hand. "Well, you have absorbed her lessons well, and you have friends here now, so you are not alone." By the end of the first week, Kenneth's fever finally broke for good. Katherine woke one morning to find him sleeping peacefully, his forehead cool to the touch and his breathing easy and regular. She sank back in her chair and allowed herself to cry, partly from relief and partly from sheer exhaustion. When she had composed herself, she went outside to wash her face at the pump, letting the cool water revive her. The Texas landscape stretched endlessly before her, so different from the tidy streets and crowded buildings of Boston. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and despite her fatigue, Katherine felt something stir in her chest. Not quite contentment, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it. A sense that she might actually belong here, that the risk she had taken in coming west might not have been foolish after all. When she returned inside, Kenneth was awake and attempting to sit up on his own. Katherine rushed over and helped him, propping pillows behind his back. "You should not try to move too quickly," she scolded gently. "You have been very ill." "I feel like I've been trampled by my entire herd," Kenneth admitted, his voice still weak but clearer than it had been in days. "But the fever is gone, thanks to you." "You would have done the same for anyone," Katherine said, busying herself with straightening the blankets. "Perhaps," Kenneth said slowly, "but not everyone would have done it for me. A stranger, essentially. A man they had never met who could not even greet them properly when they arrived. You could have gone back to town, wired your family for passage home. No one would have blamed you." Katherine met his eyes directly. "That is not who I am, Mr. Kane." "Kenneth," he corrected. "I think we are beyond formality given that you have spent the last week keeping me alive." "Katherine, then," she replied, allowing herself a small smile. "And you are welcome, though I expect you to return the favor by following my instructions during your recovery. You are not to leave this bed until I say otherwise." Over the following days, as Kenneth gradually regained his strength, they began to truly talk. Katherine sat by his bedside during the hours when he was awake, and they shared the stories of their lives. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her father's import business that had failed after a series of bad investments, about her mother's illness and death, and about the mounting debts that had left the family desperate. "My sister Emma married a clerk," Katherine explained. "A good man, but his salary barely supports them, let alone 3 additional mouths. I could have stayed, found work as a seamstress or governess, but the wages would not have been enough to truly help. And then I saw your advertisement, read your letters, and thought perhaps I could build something better here." Kenneth listened intently, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "That took courage, coming to a place you had never seen, to marry a man you knew only through letters." "Or desperation," Katherine said wryly. "The line between courage and necessity is often quite thin." "Perhaps," Kenneth agreed, "but you could have chosen any of a dozen other advertisements. Why mine?" Katherine considered the question, trying to articulate what had drawn her to Kenneth's words among all the others she had read. "You wrote differently than the others. Most men simply listed their assets, their land holdings, what they could provide. You wrote about what you hoped to build, about partnership rather than possession. You asked what I wanted from life, not just what I could offer you. That seemed significant." A flush that had nothing to do with fever colored Kenneth's cheeks. "I wanted to be honest. Too many men out here are just looking for unpaid labor, someone to cook and clean and bear children without any thought to the woman's happiness. I have seen those marriages, and they are miserable for everyone involved. I wanted something different, something real." "Then we are aligned in that hope," Katherine said softly. Kenneth reached out slowly and took her hand. His grip was still weak, but the gesture carried weight. "I know this is not how either of us imagined starting this arrangement, but I am grateful you are here, Katherine. More grateful than I can properly express." Katherine squeezed his hand gently. "Then get well, and we will figure out the rest as we go." By the second week, Kenneth was strong enough to sit in a chair on the front porch for short periods. Katherine helped him outside, supporting his weight as he walked on unsteady legs. Walter Pritchard stopped by regularly with updates on the ranch work, and other neighbors came too, curious about Kenneth's new bride and offering their assistance. "You have made quite an impression," Kenneth told her one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "Sarah says half the women in the county are talking about the city girl who turned out to be tougher than she looked." Katherine laughed. "I am not sure whether to be flattered or insulted." "Be flattered," Kenneth said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Catherine's heart skip. "You have earned their respect, which is not easily done. These are people who value actions over words, and you have proven yourself through both." As Kenneth continued to recover, Katherine learned more about the ranch and the life he had built here. He had come to Texas 5 years earlier, in 1871, a young man of 22 with money inherited from his grandfather and a determination to make his own way. He had purchased the land, built the house with his own hands, and slowly accumulated a herd of cattle that now numbered over 200 head. "It has been hard work," he admitted, "and lonely at times, but I wanted to build something that mattered, something that was mine. Not handed down or given, but earned." "I understand that impulse," Katherine said, "though I confess I know nothing about ranching." "You will learn," Kenneth assured her, "and I will teach you if you are willing. This ranch, if you stay, it will be as much yours as mine." I meant what I wrote in my letters about partnership. The word "if" hung between them, a reminder that their marriage had not yet taken place, that Katherine was under no obligation to remain. They had both carefully avoided discussing their wedding plans during Kenneth's illness, focusing instead on his recovery. But now that he was clearly on the mend, the question of their future could not be postponed indefinitely. One evening, as Katherine was preparing supper, Kenneth brought up the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them. "Katherine," he said, his tone serious, "we should talk about what happens next." She set down the spoon she had been using and turned to face him. "All right. You came here expecting to marry me," Kenneth said carefully, "but circumstances have changed. You have seen me at my worst, helpless and dependent. You have worked yourself to exhaustion caring for a stranger who could offer you nothing in return. That is not what you signed up for, and I will not hold you to an agreement made under false pretenses." Katherine folded her arms across her chest. "What are you saying, Kenneth?" "I am saying I will not trap you here out of obligation. If you want to leave, I will arrange passage back to Boston. I will give you money to restart your life there, enough that you will not have to worry about your family's debts. You owe me nothing." "I see," Katherine said quietly. She was silent for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. "And what if I do not want to leave?" Kenneth looked up at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You would stay." "Truly, I would," Katherine said, moving to sit across from him at the small table. "Kenneth, I will not pretend that these past 2 weeks have been what I expected. But they have shown me something important about who you are. The letters you wrote were not false. You are exactly the man they suggested, someone thoughtful and honest, someone worth building a life with." "But you barely know me," Kenneth protested, though hope flickered in his eyes. "And yet, I know you better than I might have after months of courtship under normal circumstances," Katherine countered. "I have seen you vulnerable and ill. I have heard you in your fever dreams, learned your character through the way your neighbors speak of you, understood your values through the life you have built here. Perhaps it is unconventional, but I believe we have a foundation to build on." Kenneth reached across the table and took both her hands in his. His grip was stronger now, steadier. "Then you will marry me, knowing all the hardships that come with ranch life, knowing how isolated we are out here, how hard the work will be." "Yes," Katherine said simply. "I will marry you, Kenneth Kane, not out of desperation or obligation, but because I believe we can build something good together." The smile that broke across Kenneth's face transformed it completely, and Katherine caught her breath at the sight. He had been handsome even in illness, but now, with genuine joy lighting his features, he was striking. "Then we should do this properly," Kenneth said. "When I am strong enough to stand without swaying, we will go into town. I will buy you a ring, and we will be married by the minister there. And Katherine, I promise you this, I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret this decision." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Madisonville, with Walter and Sarah Pritchard standing as witnesses. Katherine wore a simple dress of pale blue that Sarah had helped her make from fabric Kenneth had purchased in town. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when Kenneth slipped the gold band onto her finger, Katherine felt the weight of the promise they were making to each other. The minister, Reverend Thompson, was an elderly man with kind eyes who had known Kenneth since his arrival in Texas. "Kenneth Kane, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Kenneth said, his voice clear and strong. He had regained most of his strength over the past weeks, and he looked at Katherine with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "And Katherine Miller, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Katherine replied, meaning every word. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Kenneth kissed her gently, a brief touch that nevertheless promised more to come. As they turned to face their small audience, Katherine caught Sarah dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even Walter looked suspiciously misty. Afterward, several of the neighbors had arranged a small celebration at the town hall, with food and music provided by the community. Katherine found herself surrounded by friendly faces, all eager to welcome her properly to Madisonville. The women plied her with advice about everything from preserving fruit to managing ranch accounts, while the men offered Kenneth their congratulations with hearty handshakes and knowing grins. As evening fell and the celebration wound down, Kenneth drove them home in the wagon, Katherine sitting close beside him on the bench. The Texas sky stretched endlessly above them, scattered with more stars than Katherine had ever seen in her life. The vastness of it still took her breath away. "Are you frightened?" Kenneth asked quietly as they neared the ranch. "Of what?" Katherine asked. "Tonight. The intimacy of marriage. I know we have been living in the same house, but that was different. You were my nurse, not my wife. Now everything changes." Katherine considered her answer carefully. "I would be lying if I said I was not nervous, but I am not frightened, not of you. You have been nothing but respectful and kind to me, Kenneth. I trust you." Kenneth pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and turned to face her fully. "I will never give you cause to regret that trust, Katherine. That is my solemn vow to you. And tonight we proceed at whatever pace feels right to you. There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." The tenderness in his voice made Katherine's chest tighten. She had not expected such consideration, such genuine care for her comfort. Many men, she knew, would have simply taken what they considered their marital right without thought to their bride's feelings. But Kenneth was proving himself different at every turn. That night, in the bedroom that had become so familiar to Katherine during Kenneth's illness, they came together as husband and wife. Kenneth was gentle and patient, taking time to ensure Katherine's comfort, and though there was initial awkwardness, as there always was between two people learning each other, there was also tenderness and growing passion. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Katherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged, here in this modest ranch house in the middle of Texas, with this good man who held her as if she was precious. "I love you," Kenneth whispered against her hair. "I know it is soon to say such things, but it is true. I think I started loving you the moment I woke from fever to find you still there, still fighting to keep me alive when you could have run." Katherine tilted her face up to his. "And I love you. Perhaps I am foolish to feel it so quickly, but there it is. You have my heart, Kenneth Kane." They kissed again, sealing the words, and Katherine knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, they would face them together. The following months taught Katherine more about ranch life than she could have imagined. Kenneth, true to his word about partnership, involved her in every aspect of running the ranch. She learned to milk the cows, tend the chickens, manage the kitchen garden she planted behind the house, and keep the account books that tracked their expenses and income. The work was exhausting, far more physically demanding than anything she had done in Boston, but it was also satisfying in a way she had never experienced. Kenneth was an excellent teacher, patient with her mistakes and generous with his praise when she succeeded. They worked side by side from sunrise to sunset, and Katherine found herself growing stronger, her hands becoming calloused, her skin taking on a sun-touched glow despite her best efforts with bonnets and long sleeves. "You are becoming a true rancher's wife," Sarah Pritchard told her one afternoon when she had come to visit. The two women had formed a close friendship, and Sarah's guidance had been invaluable in helping Katherine navigate her new life. "I am certainly building the muscles for it," Katherine replied with a laugh, rolling her shoulders after an afternoon spent hauling water for the garden. "More than that," Sarah said seriously. "You have adapted in ways many could not. You should be proud of yourself, dear." As summer gave way to fall, Katherine and Kenneth settled into a rhythm of married life that felt increasingly natural. They talked during meals, sharing their thoughts and dreams. They worked together during the day, and at night they found comfort and joy in each other's arms. The love that had sparked between them during those first difficult weeks continued to deepen, growing into something solid and enduring. In October, Kenneth brought home a letter that had arrived at the general store in town. It was from Katherine's sister Emma, the first communication she had received from Boston since her wedding. Katherine opened it with trembling fingers and read aloud to Kenneth. "Dear Katherine, I hope this letter finds you well and happy in your new life. Please forgive the delay in writing. Things here have been difficult since you left, but we are managing. I want you to know that the money you sent has been an enormous help. We were able to pay off Father's debts and still have enough left to buy proper winter coats for the children. I cannot thank you enough for your sacrifice. Your niece Margaret asks about you constantly and wants to know when Aunt Katherine will come home. I tell her that Texas is your home now, which is strange to say, but I hope true. Please write when you can and tell me all about your husband and your new life. With love, Emma." Katherine set down the letter, her eyes moist. "She thinks I sacrificed myself for them, that this marriage was some noble gesture on my part." Kenneth came to stand behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "Was it not, in part? You were honest with me from the beginning about your family's situation." "Perhaps initially," Katherine admitted, "but now it feels like the opposite. Like I am the one who gained everything while they remained behind in difficult circumstances. I have you this life, this beautiful place." "What did I sacrifice, really?" Kenneth turned her gently to face him. "Write back to her. Tell her the truth, that you are happy. That will ease her conscience better than anything else." Katherine did write back, pouring out her heart onto paper. She described the ranch, the vast Texas landscape, the kindness of their neighbors. Most of all, she wrote about Kenneth, about the man she had married and the love that had grown between them. She tried to convey that while the work was hard and the life challenging, she had found something in Texas that Boston had never offered: a sense of purpose and belonging, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. As Christmas approached, Kenneth surprised Katherine by cutting down a small cedar tree and setting it up in their main room. "I thought you might miss having a proper Christmas," he said, looking almost shy. Sarah told me how you mentioned the traditions your family had in Boston. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes at his thoughtfulness. Together, they decorated the tree with strings of popcorn and small ornaments Katherine fashioned from scraps of fabric. On Christmas Eve, they invited Walter and Sarah to share a meal, and Katherine prepared a feast from their stores and the chickens Kenneth had raised. It was different from her childhood Christmases, more modest and simple, but no less meaningful. After their guests had left and they sat together by the fire, Kenneth handed Katherine a small wrapped package. "It is not much," he said, "but I wanted you to have something special." Inside, Katherine found a beautiful silver locket on a delicate chain. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Kenneth on one side, taken in town by the traveling photographer who had passed through in November. "Kenneth, it is beautiful," she breathed. "The other side is for a picture of you when we can arrange it," Kenneth explained. "So we will always be together, close to each other's hearts." Katherine threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "I love you so much. And I love you, Katherine Kane, more than I thought it possible to love another person." Winter in Texas proved milder than the brutal Boston winters Katherine had known, but it brought its own challenges. A hard freeze in January threatened their water supply, and they worked frantically to protect the stock. When one of their cows went into a difficult labor, Katherine assisted Kenneth in delivering the calf, her squeamishness overcome by necessity. The calf survived, and Kenneth insisted on letting Katherine name it. "Miracle," she said without hesitation. "Because that is what it feels like, this life we are building. A miracle I never expected to find." As spring arrived in 1877, bringing wildflowers that painted the landscape in brilliant colors, Katherine realized that she had not had her monthly courses in some time. At first, she attributed it to the hard physical work, as her body had taken months to adjust to the demands of ranch life. But when the nausea began, occurring most severely in the mornings, she recognized the signs for what they were. She waited until she was certain before telling Kenneth. One evening after supper, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is something you should know," she said softly. "We are going to have a child." Kenneth's eyes went wide, and for a moment he simply stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop. "Are you certain?" he demanded, setting her down but keeping his hands on her shoulders as if afraid she might disappear. "As certain as I can be without a doctor's confirmation, but all the signs are there." Kenneth pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. "A child, our child. Katherine, you have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed well through the spring and into summer. Sarah proved invaluable once again, providing advice and reassurance as Katherine's body changed and grew. Kenneth became almost comically protective, insisting that Katherine rest more and work less, though she protested that she was perfectly capable of maintaining her usual tasks. "The baby and I are both healthy," she argued one afternoon when Kenneth tried to take over the garden work. "Sarah says exercise is good for expecting mothers." "Sarah also says you should not overdo it," Kenneth countered. "Please, Katherine, let me help more. I cannot bear the thought of anything happening to you or the child." His genuine worry softened her frustration. She cupped his face in her hands. "Nothing will happen. I am strong, and we have good medical care available if needed, but I promise to be sensible and not push myself too hard." "Does that ease your mind?" "Somewhat," Kenneth admitted, then kissed her forehead. "Forgive me for hovering. I just love you both so much already." In September, Katherine went into labor 3 weeks earlier than expected. Kenneth rode hard for Sarah Pritchard while Katherine focused on breathing through the contractions. By the time Sarah arrived with her midwife supplies, the labor was progressing rapidly. "This baby is eager to meet the world," Sarah said with an encouraging smile. "You are doing wonderfully, dear." Kenneth hovered anxiously outside the bedroom door until Sarah finally took pity on him and allowed him in. He held Catherine's hand through the final hours of labor, offering what comfort he could, his face pale with worry. When their son finally arrived in the early morning hours of September 15th, his lusty cry filling the small house, Kenneth actually wept. Sarah cleaned the baby and placed him in Catherine's arms, and they both stared down at the miracle they had created. "He is perfect," Katherine whispered, exhausted but elated. "Look at him, Kenneth. He has your eyes." "And your determination, I think," Kenneth said, gently touching his son's tiny fist. "He certainly made his entrance known." They named him Elijah Kenneth Kane, and he quickly became the center of their world. Kenneth proved to be a devoted father, taking on extra household tasks so Katherine could rest and recover, and insisting on taking his turn walking the floor with Elijah during the night. "You need your sleep," he told Katherine when she protested. "And I want this time with my son. I do not want to be one of those fathers who leaves all the child rearing to the mother." As Elijah grew from a tiny newborn into a robust infant, the ranch continued to prosper. Kenneth hired a young man named Tom Peterson to help with the heavier ranch work, which allowed him more time with his family. Tom was 18, eager to learn ranching, and proved to be a reliable worker. "I want to build something lasting," Kenneth told Katherine one evening as they watched Elijah sleep in the cradle Kenneth had built with his own hands. "Not just for us, but for our children and their children. This ranch, this land, it is our legacy." Katherine leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling deeply content. "You have already built something lasting, Kenneth. You built it the day I arrived and found you ill, and you continued building it every day since. A home, a family, a life worth living." In the spring of 1878, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy proved more challenging than the first, with stronger nausea and more fatigue. Kenneth insisted she rest as much as possible, taking on even more of the household work himself. "I do not want you to overexert yourself," he said firmly when she tried to argue. "Elijah needs his mother, and I need my wife. Please, let me take care of you." Their daughter was born in November, a beautiful baby girl with her mother's dark hair and delicate features. They named her Rose Emma Kane, the middle name honoring Catherine's sister. With 2 young children, life on the ranch became even busier. Katherine often found herself running from one task to another, caring for the babies, maintaining the household, and still helping with ranch work when she could. But there was joy in the chaos, especially when she watched Kenneth with their children. He was a devoted father, patient and playful, and both Elijah and Rose clearly adored him. Letters continued to arrive periodically from Boston. Emma wrote that she and her family were doing much better financially, and that she hoped one day to visit Texas to meet Catherine's family. Katherine wrote back eagerly, describing every detail of her life and including small sketches of the children. As the 1870s drew to a close, the ranch continued to grow and prosper. Kenneth expanded their herd and improved their stock through careful breeding. They built additions onto the house, adding more bedrooms and a proper dining room. The modest homestead Kenneth had built as a bachelor was transforming into a true family home. One evening in the summer of 1880, as they celebrated their 4th wedding anniversary, Kenneth and Katherine sat on their expanded porch watching Elijah, now almost 3, chase fireflies in the gathering dusk while Rose dozed in her mother's arms. You ever regret it? Kenneth asked quietly. Leaving Boston, marrying a stranger, building this life that is so different from what you knew, Katherine looked at her husband, this good man who had given her so much more than she had ever dared to hope for. Not for a single moment. This life, this family, you, Kenneth, you are everything I did not know I was searching for. Coming to Texas was not a sacrifice. It was the best decision I ever made. Kenneth took her free hand, bringing it to his lips. I was dying when you arrived, not just from fever but from loneliness. I did not even fully realize it until you were there, filling this house with your presence, your strength, your love. You saved my life, Katherine, in more ways than one. And you gave me a life worth saving, Katherine replied. We saved each other, I think. That is what love does. It saves us from the loneliness of facing the world alone. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge one by one in the vast Texas sky. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and the wind whispered through the long grass. It was a simple moment, quiet and ordinary, and yet Katherine thought she had never experienced anything more perfect. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. A drought in 1881 tested their resources and resolve, but they weathered it through careful management and the support of their neighbors. In 1883, Katherine gave birth to another son, whom they named James. The addition of a third child meant the house was constantly full of noise and activity, but neither Kenneth nor Katherine would have had it any other way. Elijah grew into a sturdy boy who loved following his father around the ranch, eager to learn everything about cattle and horses. Rose proved to have her mother's quick mind and her father's gentle spirit, often helping Katherine in the house and already learning to read at just 5 years old. And little James, barely walking, brought laughter to their days with his curious nature and ready smiles. Walter and Sarah Pritchard remained close friends, and their adult children, who had moved away to start their own families, sometimes visited with grandchildren in tow. The community of Madisonville continued to grow, with new families arriving to settle the land and build their own dreams. In 1885, 7 years after their wedding, Emma finally made the long journey from Boston to visit her sister. She arrived with her 2 oldest children, and the reunion between the sisters was tearful and joyous. "Katherine, look at you," Emma said, holding her sister at arm's length. "You are so different from the worried young woman who left Boston. You are radiant." "I am happy," Katherine said simply. "Truly, genuinely happy. Come, you must meet everyone properly." Emma stayed for 6 weeks, and during that time, Katherine took great joy in showing her sister every aspect of her life. They walked the boundaries of the ranch, visited with neighbors, and spent long evenings on the porch talking while the children played. "I was so worried about you," Emma confessed one night after the children had been put to bed. "When you left to marry a stranger, I was certain you were sacrificing yourself for the family, that you would be miserable. But I see now that I was wrong. You found something here that Boston could never have given you." "I found myself," Katherine said, "and I found Kenneth. I found a place where I belong and a life that has meaning beyond mere survival. The work is hard, Emma, harder than anything I did in Boston, but it is my work. This ranch is ours, built by our hands and our determination. That makes all the difference." When Emma departed, both sisters cried, but this time the tears were different. They were not tears of fear or worry, but of the bittersweet pain of parting when you know you will be separated by distance but not by love. "Write often," Emma demanded. "And if you can, visit Boston someday. The children should know their aunts and uncles, their cousins." "We will," Katherine promised, "when the children are older and the ranch can spare us for a time. But Emma, You are always welcome here. This is your home too whenever you want to visit." As the 1880s progressed toward their close, the ranch that Kenneth had started alone and that he and Katherine had built together became one of the most respected operations in the county. Their herd had grown to over 400 head, and they employed 3 full-time ranch hands in addition to Tom Peterson, who had become their foreman and a trusted friend. The house had been expanded twice more and now boasted 6 bedrooms, a proper parlor, and a large kitchen where Katherine often hosted gatherings of neighbor women. She had become a respected figure in the community, known for her kindness and her practical wisdom. Kenneth, now in his late 30s, had grown into his role as rancher and community leader. He was frequently called upon to settle disputes between neighbors and to offer advice to younger men starting their own ranches. But his greatest pride remained his family, and he never missed an opportunity to tell anyone who would listen how fortunate he was. On a crisp autumn evening in 1888, 10 years after their wedding, Kenneth and Katherine stood together at the edge of their property, looking out over the land they had built their life upon. Their 3 children were with Sarah Pritchard for the evening, giving the couple a rare moment alone together. 10 years, Katherine said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach and found you fevered and ill. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, I think, Kenneth said, wrapping his arm around her waist. The years have passed quickly, but we have lived fully in each one. I would not change a single moment, Katherine, not even that first difficult week. Nor would I, Katherine agreed. Though I confess, I would not mind revisiting some of the easier moments a bit more often. Kenneth laughed, the sound deep and warm. We have built a good life, you and I, better than I ever dreamed possible when I first came to Texas all those years ago. And we are not done building yet, Katherine said, leaning into her husband's embrace. There is still so much ahead of us. The children will grow, the ranch will continue to expand, and we will grow old together watching it all unfold. Growing old together, Kenneth repeated softly. That is the best promise I can imagine. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. In the distance, they could hear cattle settling for the night and the soft whinny of horses in the corral. The land stretched endlessly before them, full of possibility and promise. Katherine thought back to that terrified young woman who had traveled across half a continent to marry a stranger, carrying nothing but hope and determination. That woman had been brave without fully knowing it, had possessed a strength she had never been called upon to demonstrate in Boston's restrictive society. And she had found in this wild and beautiful place more than she had ever dreamed possible, not just security, though the ranch provided that. Not just companionship, though Kenneth was her truest friend, but genuine love, the kind that grew deeper with each passing year, the kind that was tested by hardship and proved stronger for it. The kind of love that transformed 2 strangers into partners, into parents, into 2 halves of a whole. I love you, Katherine Kane, Kenneth said, as if reading her thoughts. I have loved you from the moment you refused to leave my side when you could have. I will love you until my last breath, and if there is anything beyond this life, I will love you there too. Katherine turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her feelings into that single gesture. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled up at him, this man who had given her the world without even realizing it. And I love you, Kenneth Kane. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay, and then giving me 1,000 more reasons every single day since. As they walked back toward the house hand in hand, Katherine felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had arrived in Texas as a mail-order bride, desperate and uncertain. She had found Kenneth bedridden and fevered, and she had stayed to nurse him back to health when she could have fled. And from those unlikely beginnings, they had built something extraordinary, a marriage based not on convenience or necessity, but on genuine love and mutual respect. A family filled with joy and laughter. A ranch that stood as testament to what could be achieved through hard work and dedication. A life that was rich in all the ways that truly mattered. The house came into view, its windows glowing with lamplight, a beacon of home and belonging. Katherine squeezed Kenneth's hand, and he squeezed back, and without words, they both acknowledged the truth they had learned together over these past 10 years. That sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the smallest acts of courage. That love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. That home is not a place but a person, a promise, a choice made again and again to stay, to fight, to build together. Katherine had arrived to find Kenneth bedridden. She had nursed him back to health, and she had never left his side, not through illness or hardship, drought or difficulty. She had stayed because staying was a choice she made gladly, every single day. And Kenneth had proven himself worthy of that choice 1,000 times over, loving her with a constancy and depth that never wavered. Together, they had taken the strange circumstances of their meeting and transformed them into a love story for the ages, one that would be told and retold by their children and grandchildren in the years to come. As they entered their home and closed the door against the cooling night air, Katherine reflected that she had come to Texas seeking security and found so much more. She had found her purpose, her partner, her place in the world. She had found, in the end, exactly where she belonged. And that was a happy ending worth more than all the gold in California, worth more than the finest mansion in Boston, worth more than anything she might have imagined in those uncertain days before she boarded a stagecoach and rode west into the unknown. She was Katherine Kane, wife of Kenneth Kane, mother to their children, co-owner of a thriving ranch in Madisonville, Texas. She was home and she was loved, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges, more joys and sorrows, as all lives do. But whatever came, Katherine and Kenneth would face it together, as they had faced everything since that day she arrived to find him fevered and ill. They had proven that love born in crisis could endure and flourish, that two people who started as strangers could become essential to each other's happiness. Their children would grow and eventually start families of their own. The ranch would be passed down through generations, each adding their own improvements and memories. And the story of how it all began, with a mail-order bride who refused to abandon a sick man, would become family legend, told and retold with pride. But that was all still to come. For now, on this perfect autumn evening in 1888, Kenneth and Katherine simply enjoyed the quiet joy of being together, of having built something lasting and true. They sat by their fire, talking quietly about their plans for the coming week, comfortable in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it side by side. And when they finally retired to bed, Katherine fell asleep in her husband's arms, grateful beyond measure for the twist of fate that had brought her to Texas, to this ranch, to this man. She had taken a leap of faith, and she had found everything her heart had been searching for. The wild Texas wind whispered through the rafters, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and the certainty that this love, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by time, would endure for all their days. And that was the greatest happy ending of all.